So for Middle America or Central America, I'm going to break this up into three smaller lectures. First is going to be physical geography, which is today. Then the next one is going to be historical and cultural geography, and then end up with more modern issues like politics, etc., and development. All right, I'm sharing my screen for my lecture notes, which are available, of course, as well online. So this is Middle America, and basically it stretches from Mexico all the way down to Panama. And it's our neighbors next door, and we have a lot of influence and interaction with people from this region, and so it's going to be very exciting. So we're going to do physical geography of Middle America, and we'll talk about some of the landforms, climates, a little bit of our natural vegetation as well. So starting off, and we've talked about this in a previous class about plate tectonics. The Earth is made up of different tectonic plates that run into each other, separate from each other, go side by side, etc. And the big ones for this area is the North American plate. That includes much of Mexico. And then the Caribbean plate, which includes much of Central America. And that'll be something important for our next class when we talk about the Caribbean. And a cool thing also looking at this is the Cocos plate. If you see that on this map, it's running into the Caribbean plate and it's creating some interesting subduction zones and a lot of tectonic activity. And if we look at this, this shows earthquakes and volcanoes. And you can see Central America has a whole lot of those because of that subduction zone, the running of the Cocos plate with the Caribbean plate as well as the North American plate. So a convergent plate boundary, we may have talked about this before, the subduction zone means that the oceanic crust runs into the continental crust, and that's what the Cocos plate is doing into the Caribbean plate. And so the oceanic crust goes down, the Cocos plate gets subducted underneath the continental plate, which is the Caribbean plate. And along those areas, you have the folding and buckling and creating of mountains, but you also have fissures that are created that create magma coming up as well as water, and that creates a volcanic arc. So off the shore, there's going to be a trench, a deep water trench as it's being pulled down. And then inside, you're going to have the volcanoes on land, as well as earthquakes. So again, just kind of zooming in on the tectonic plates, you can see the Cocos plate is being subducted underneath the Caribbean plate, and that's all along that coast of Central America. For the North American plate, we're also having some activity with earthquakes and volcanoes too that we'll discuss here in a moment. Now this image shows that the trench, see the Middle American trench? That's where it's being subducted underneath the Caribbean plate. So the Cocos plate is going underneath the Caribbean plate, and that creates this trench. And then there's an active thing of volcanoes, and it goes all the way down Central America. There's active volcanoes all the way along, coming down on that side of the Caribbean plate. And you can see a lot of the rugged topography that we also see in Central America. Lots of mountains, very rugged. I did my dissertation work way out here in Western Honduras, and it took so long just to get from the capital to my site because it was such rugged topography. Cortez, who was the conqueror of the Aztecs and one of the conquistadors that came over, he went back to the king of Spain and they said, "What does Honduras look like?" And he rumpled up a piece of paper and said, "That's what it looks like." It's very rugged terrain and difficult for transportation. Now, let's start in the north with the Mexican landforms. So Mexico, of course, is on the North American plate for the most part, and it's the largest country in Middle America. So first, the Baja Peninsula. Many of you have probably been to Baja. It's a very dry, arid, desert-like region with mountains. There are some, pine forests in the higher elevations, but that's actually on the Pacific plate. And we have a divergent plate boundary going on in the Gulf of California separating it out. But as we move inland onto the North American plate of Mexico, we have first the Western Sierra Madre, the Sierra Madre Occidental. These are a rugged mountain chain. It's an extension of the Rocky Mountains, going all the way up to Alaska. And it has some of the deepest canyons in the world. This is Copper Canyon. It's over 6,000 feet deep, if not more. And so it's one of the most rugged ones. And so we have that. And they do have a lot of vegetation in terms of pine forests and things like that that we see in the Rocky Mountains as you get higher in elevation. Then we have the Mexican Plateau. And again, an extension that goes all the way into New Mexico. And this is a highland plateau. It's very much more desert-like, but as you move further south, you get a lot more moisture, and it ends in Mexico City. And then on the eastern side, we have the Sierra Madre Oriental, the eastern Sierra Madres. And these ones have much more vegetation because you have moisture coming in from the Gulf of Mexico that comes up and creates more precipitation. And so you have a little bit more of a lush vegetation. So again, looking at this, we have the Sierra Madre Occidental, the Sierra Madre Oriental, and the Mexican Plateau. And then as you get down to the southern Mexico, you get a lot more moisture. It's Mexico City sits at over 7,000 feet in elevation, so it's a relatively temperate climate. But at the bottom of it, we actually have the Cordillera Neovolcanica, or as they call it here, the Sierra Madre del Sur, the same thing. And because of this subduction zone, we have active volcanoes that are running right by Mexico City. So there's earthquakes, volcanic activity. This one here on the right that you see the image of is right outside of Mexico City. It's 17,000 feet, and currently it's actually active and kind of smoking and doing some activity, if you will. So right at the bottom, below Mexico City, you have another mountain range that's volcanic. Now, another important part of Mexico is the Yucatan Peninsula. And the Yucatan Peninsula is made up of karst topography that's limestone based, which means that historically it was underneath the water, underneath the ocean, and all the shell life and animal life, etc., they die and they create sedimentary layers of limestone. And the thing with limestone is very porous, so you don't have a lot of surface rivers on the Yucatan Peninsula because most of the water drops underground. And that creates a different type of a landscape. It's relatively flat, not perfectly flat, but it is a very unique type of topography on the Yucatan. And some of you may have gone to Cancun or something like that on the Yucatan Peninsula. Now for Central America, so we'll kind of leave Mexico, and we'll go down to Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Panama, etc. Again, the Cocos Plate is running into the Caribbean Plate, and that creates some interesting activity, if you will, tectonically. So we have what's called the Central American Volcanic Axes. And that means that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a subduction zone where the Cocos Plate is running underneath the Caribbean Plate, and we have the trench offshore. And then all along this are lines of volcanoes. And I've seen quite a bit of this as well. I've seen active ones in Guatemala as well as in Costa Rica that are active volcanoes. The nice thing about volcanoes is that it creates really good soils. So we have high population densities along this axis because you have good soils, you can grow a lot more crops, etc. The problem is that they do oftentimes blow up. And here's just a picture I took seeing the different volcanoes in a line almost coming down this axis. So let's watch a quick video about this.
Temperatures of about 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit.
Not everyone escaped. I think they were buried.
Social video captured people running when a lahar, a streaming mudslide triggered by volcanic material, slammed into a bridge. Video also captured this police car as it was engulfed by the ash. More than 3,000 people have been evacuated from Fuego's immediate vicinity. Many sought protection and medical treatment in local shelters.
I heard screams of, "Get out of here." I looked and I saw that the lava was coming. The cars were covered by the lava. One child was crying because her grandmother and her mother were still there. I am sure they died.
Guatemala's president has declared a state of emergency, and aviation officials have temporarily closed Guatemala City's international airport.
We have shut it down as a precautionary measure for the planes because the volcanic ash is harmful to the turbines.
At least 62 people died in Fuego's initial eruption, but many still remain unaccounted for. Additional eruptions and lava flows continue Monday.
Okay, so that was just a quick video about something that happened in the last year or two in Guatemala, and I was there a couple years before COVID, and I saw that volcano, kind of not erupting, but spewing out ash and things like that. I've seen the same thing in Costa Rica. So there's a long line of volcanoes that run right down on that Central American volcanic axis. Now, Central America also has coastal plains, and they're really important in terms of plantation agriculture. So things from bananas to pineapples to a bit of sugarcane as well. And we can see that really in Nicaragua, here in Honduras, the Guatemalan, and it's both on the Pacific and the Caribbean side. And here's just kind of a picture of seeing those Caribbean plains. It's very hot and tropical, and we'll talk more about settlement later because the Spanish really didn't like these areas because it was too hot and humid. There weren't a lot of indigenous populations for them to enslave, which we'll talk about much more as we move along. But it was inhabited, especially on the Caribbean coast, by the British, and they brought over slaves from the Caribbean and then ex-slaves afterwards to work on plantations. Now, in terms of climates, you can kind of think like it's an extension in many ways of where we live here in California. As you move further south, the Baja becomes desert. And the northern part is like Arizona, New Mexico. The northern part is desert. Then as you move further south, it gets a little bit wetter. And so you end up with steppe climates, which have more than 10 inches of rain a year. And then when you come down toward Mexico City, it gets higher in elevation. It's much more a temperate climate. And the H means a highland climate because of mountains that alters the climates in many ways. And then what we're going to talk about, especially when we talk about the Caribbean, is that we have what are called the northeast trade winds. So the winds are coming from the northeast and they come across the Caribbean Sea, picking up moisture. They're very warm. The water is like 80 degrees. And when they hit land, they cause a lot of rainfall. So the AF climate that you're seeing here is a tropical wet climate. But as it moves through the mountains and goes to the other side, we have a rain shadow effect, and that creates a tropical savanna climate. That's the AWs. So it's a pretty simple pattern as we move north and south of the equator, but Central America has a lot of tropical wet climates on the Caribbean side and savanna climates on the rain shadow side. Okay, this is our coverage of physical geography for Middle America. Our next one will now go into historical geography.